Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about China's hand-torn steel, which is #1 in the world. Since the US wants to slap a 100% tariff on it, well, let the US make it themselves. On another note, Putin has given out a Lenin badge as a gesture, while Europe and Ukraine are hoping to join the negotiations. Can Trump's new Yalta model, where the great powers decide the fate of the world, actually become a reality? This June, Trump raised the import tariffs on steel and aluminum products from 25% to 50%, hoping to boost domestic steel production in the US as a replacement. But now, every industry is moving towards high-tech, and the US has already stopped manufacturing in many sectors for over 20 years. Its technology is completely lagging behind, and even if they try to catch up, it might take more than 20 years and still not be enough. So how can they replace Chinese manufacturing? One example of this is hand-torn steel. Mainland Chinese self-media personality Li Hanchai reviewed China's hand-torn steel journey, from lagging to world #1. This classic breakthrough saw China crack the foreign monopoly on capacitor paper. You've seen aluminum foil for wrapping food, right? Now, consider a more important steel. It's so thin it seems hand-tearable, like a rice noodle sheet. This is China's invention, hand-torn steel, a stainless steel material only 0.02 millimeters thick, about a quarter as thin as F4 paper. When you hold it, it feels so light, like it could be blown away by wind, a thin, delicate sheet. 5 years ago, only 2 companies globally, one in Japan and one in Germany, could produce this. The US wasn't in the game. China had to spend a lot annually to import this hand-torn steel, and we had no choice but to accept. At critical moments, they would just cut off the supply of this material without warning. If they said they wouldn't sell, then that was it. It was just like the current situation with high-end chips and the lithography machines used to make them, but the engineers and technicians at China's Taigang Group simply refused to believe it or give up. As early as 2016, they formed a team, determined to develop their own hand-torn steel, but the process was extremely difficult. Every time the rolling mill pressed down on the steel, it would get a bit thinner, but if they pressed too much, it would break. And each time the roller was used, it would wear down a little. As it wore away, the diameter would get smaller, and once it got down to 22 millimeters, the whole roller had to be scrapped. Taigang went through more than 700 experiments, failing again and again. Over 2 years, they managed to find the only workable combination out of more than 40,000 possible roller parameter combinations. By 2020, they finally succeeded. That was the year China made its breakthrough. At that time, the hand-torn steel produced by Taigang was only 0.02 millimeters thick and 600 millimeters wide, rolled up into a huge coil. The shiny, thin steel directly broke the world record. In May that year, President Xi visited Taigang, held the steel in his hands and examined it closely. Smiling, he said the craftsmanship was excellent, as thin as a slice of meat. A century-old steel company making steel as thin as dumpling wrappers. 3 months later, this group took another step forward, producing hand-torn steel at just 0.015 millimeters, breaking the world record. Taigang became the only company in the world capable of mass-producing record-breaking, ultra-thin, white stainless steel. Steel this thin has a lot of uses. It's both light and tough, and even after being pierced 100,000 times, it won't crack. That's why the base material for foldable phone screens is made from it. Precision instruments in satellites, electromagnetic shielding in commercial vehicles, and even components in military equipment that block electronic interference all rely on ultra-thin hand-torn steel. In the past, foreign companies that sold us hand-torn steel are now coming to China to buy it. Even Apple wants to use it in their phones. We've talked about hand-torn steel before, but actually, the story doesn't end there. This May, Taigang made another big move. They launched 2 new types of hand-torn steel. One is a 0.03 millimeter thick, 5,000 meter long high-temperature superconducting substrate, specially designed for superconducting power equipment. Superconductors have zero resistance, which can greatly reduce energy loss during power transmission and enable highly efficient electricity storage. Superconducting power is a major area for future energy development. The other one is even more impressive, a 0.05 millimeter thick mask plate, which is the core material used in making phone and display screens. On the thin steel of the mask plate, if you look under a 200x microscope, Just an area the size of a fingertip contains 2 to 4 million evenly distributed microholes. This means that China has finally overcome the last material bottleneck in photomask technology. Looking back, China went from being suffocated by foreign monopolies to finally breaking free and holding its head high, and now has become number one in the world. China's ultra-thin steel has taken a classic path of turning the tables. In the past, China had to spend 1.6 trillion yuan every year to import this kind of steel, but now it can be fully produced domestically. After the first domestically produced batch came out, when foreign countries wanted to sell similar steel to China, the price of imported ultra-thin steel was forced down by 40% or even 60%. China's exported ultra-thin steel offers the best value for money, so it's only natural that it sweeps away foreign competitors, and the most high-end ultra-thin steel is still exclusively made in China. Just imagine, if the US wants to slap a 5% tariff on imported steel, of course it's the American importers who have to pay, and in the end, it's the American consumers who foot the bill. And that's not all. Just a few months ago, China already announced that for this round of exports of the highest grade 0.015 mm ultra-thin steel to Western countries, not only will China firmly hold the pricing power, but foreign buyers can only get second-tier materials. In July, the Metallurgical Science and Technology Award, the steel industry's highest honor, granted its special prize to intelligent rolling technology for ultra-thin, large-size steel. Judges stated this ensures internationally leading, independent supply of key materials for national defense, military, and aerospace. By controlling export of the most advanced ultra-thin steel, it's like others controlling advanced chip exports to China. This is how we counter their moves and turn the tables. In addition, US President Trump has arranged a meeting with Russian President Putin on August 15th in Alaska, with the main focus being a plan to achieve long-term peace in Ukraine. However, Trump wants to replay the Yalta conference model, where world leaders make decisions and no one else is allowed to interfere. But now, both the EU and Ukraine want to get involved. They are alarmed by the rumors of US-Russia talks and the prospect of a peace plan. According to a Wall Street Journal report on August 8th, citing European and Ukrainian officials, Putin presented the Trump administration with a ceasefire proposal for Ukraine. The proposal demands Ukraine make significant concessions and urges the international community to recognize Russia's claims in exchange. European officials are highly skeptical of this proposal, as it requires Ukraine to give up part of its eastern region known as Donbass, and Russia, apart from promising a ceasefire, is making almost no concessions. Putin conveyed this proposal to US envoy Kurt Volker in Moscow on the 8th. Trump seems quite receptive to it. According to a New York Times report on August 9th, since Europe was not present at these talks, there are concerns about being sidelined, and worries that the US and Russia might impose an agreement on Ukraine without European involvement. On the same day, European and Ukrainian leaders met with senior US officials in the outskirts of London, aiming to understand Putin's position and to ensure that US President Trump is aware of the stakes involved. According to two European officials who were briefed on the meeting, it was co-chaired by Foreign Minister Lamy and US Vice President Pence. Senior officials from Ukraine and several European countries attended. During the meeting, European countries expressed their support for Ukrainian President Zelensky and tried to emphasize that Trump should take into account the common position of European nations. The two European officials also stressed that Europeans are concerned Trump and Putin might reach an agreement on their own and then try to impose it on Ukraine. They said Europe is trying to make it clear to the Trump administration that Ukraine must be included in the negotiations. The era when US and Soviet leaders divided up Europe at the Yalta conference is long gone. According to European officials, after hearing President Trump's account, it seems he and Putin are about to have a Yalta moment of their own. The borders within Europe would be decided by these two major powers. European officials said that Europeans, as always, support Ukraine's position and insist that a ceasefire must come before any negotiations on territorial changes. Ukraine will not hand over any land occupied by Russia to the Russian side. Any agreement must include security guarantees, including those from the United States. Previously, Trump had stated that Europeans must be responsible for Ukraine's security after an agreement is reached. European officials also insist that the US and Russia cannot presume to represent the positions of Ukraine or Europeans in reaching any agreement. Although it is currently unrealistic for Ukraine to join NATO, they also reiterated NATO's consistent position of not closing the door to Ukraine. However, Trump is very obsessed with the idea that powerful countries get to call the shots. As early as March 17 last year, the New York Times compared the phone call between Trump and Putin after years without contact to the historic Yalta conference. Back then, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, the three major leaders, attended a meeting in 1945 that divided the European continent into a Western Bloc allied with the United States and an Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, which later shaped the spheres of influence during the Cold War. The New York Times acknowledged that the current geopolitical landscape of the world is indeed very similar to the situation at the end of World War II, with major powers seeking to establish a new global order through negotiations, just like the three leaders at the Yalta conference redrawing the world map back then. Nowadays, the European Union opposes this Yalta-style arrangement where the US and Russia call the shots, but at the same time, Putin is also putting pressure on Trump. Foreign media have revealed that Putin has recently made a subtle move. When Putin met with US presidential envoy Vaitkov on August 6, he handed over a medal from Medvedev to him, asking him to pass it on to Julian Galina, the CIA's deputy director for digital innovation. This medal was meant to honor Galina's son, Gross. According to reports, Gross died last year in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The CIA previously issued a statement confirming that Galina's son, Gross, died last year while fighting in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but did not specify which country he was fighting for. Russian media confirmed that Gross had joined the Russian military, fought for Russia, and ultimately died in battle. It appears that Gross was not an American spy, but rather a rebellious American youth, which is why he fought on the Russian side. This incident also indirectly reflects that Trump is eager for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and even hopes that Russia will cooperate. Putin took the opportunity to play this card, which puts the US in an awkward position. It's like telling the US, I do whatever I want, it's Russia who calls the shots, not the US. To some, Trump faces pressure from both sides. Putin, uncontrollable, wants US to accept his ceasefire proposal. Meanwhile, EU stirring up, wanting to join negotiations opposing Putin's plan. Second, if Trump wants to pull off a Yalta-style agreement, he would have to ignore the wishes of the EU and Ukraine and lean heavily towards Putin. But doing so would be very hard to wrap up. This really seems like a dilemma.